Hey guys, what's up? It's Ashlyn here. Alright, so, don't know why the camera quality is so grainy today, but okay, whatever. Sorry if the quality sucks today, but it is 12:50 and I want to try and get some more reading done in the gratitude diaries. I already had coffee and breakfast and everything else. Doing my nick now. But we left off, remember we skipped chapter 3 and we're going straight to chapter 4. So I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to get fully through this because like I said, it's 12:51. I got to be at work at 2. But I figured I'd put some makeup on, put a pink shirt on because it is Friday, guys. And I figured we'd get back into the stories. So, open your books to page 73. Yeah, page 73 in your Gratitude Diaries by Janice Kaplan. And if you're new here, just join us. And then you can always go back after the video and read, or the first 2 chapters are in the first video. So, let's get into it. Chapter 4, the no complaining zone. So grateful to stop complaining. Thankful to enjoy the weather, however cold it may be. Grateful to discover how being positive can change my mood. With gratitude helping me with husband and kids, I started thinking about what else I could do for my daily interactions. On a wintry day, as I slipped and slid across an icy sidewalk, I thought wryly that the one thing gratitude couldn't fix was the weather. 1 second. Alright, sorry about that. I left my living room TV on, so that's probably what you heard in the background. I apologize. Otherwise, you're just going to hear cars going by because the window's right there and it's open for some fresh air. Well, wait a minute. Why not? Everybody I met on the street seemed to have turned into Weatherman Al Roker, announcing that it was 5 degrees with a wind chill that made it feel like 10 below. One morning, I had found myself exchanging complaints about the cold as I bought a bagel, stood at the bus stop, and got into an elevator. By the time I landed at the conference room where I was headed, I was exhausted from all the griping. My gratitude journal didn't contain any magic spells to turn the cold into Caribbean sunshine. I don't know if even Harry Potter could do that. But there was one thing I could do about the incredibly cold winter that was paralyzing the East Coast and parts of the Midwest. Stop grousing about it. Finding the good in every day meant overlooking, as much as possible, quotidian problems. Gratitude shouldn't be reserved for special occasions. So my plan for this month took shape. I stopped complaining about the weather and used that as a stepping stone to become more grateful for ordinary everyday life. People whining about the weather know it doesn't help. They simply take solace in venting. The get it off your chest approach has many adherents, but what you say has an effect on how you feel. Announce too often that you're miserable, and you begin to believe you really are. I had the sense that friends, strangers, and casual acquaintances commiserating about the bad conditions just made everyone more unhappy. There had to be a better way of bonding than belly aching about something we couldn't change. So as I walked down the street and bundled a plaid scarf a little tighter around my neck, I thought about using my new technique of reframing as part of the daily business of getting through the day. Surely I could find a positive side to storms. I remembered a line from the English artist and social thinker John Ruskin that there is no such thing as bad weather, only different kinds of good weather. Just then, a man who was clearing snow from the sidewalk in front of his building tossed back a shovelful, and it landed smack on my shoulder. Ugh, I shouted. Sorry, the man mumbled, turning to see what he'd done. He was wearing a thick hat and heavy muffler and probably hadn't seen me coming up behind him. Be more careful, I said, my face flushed as I brushed the snow off my coat. I started to walk off in a huff and then stopped. My attitude of gratitude had to hold in all conditions. Took a deep breath and tried the trick of flipping from bad to good. Sure, he'd hit me with a shovel full of snow, but I was lucky to live in a part of the city where people kept their sidewalks cleared in snowstorms, and I was definitely grateful that he was out shoveling instead of me. I hesitated and then took a few steps back in his direction and waved my hand. He stopped, shovel midair. What's wrong? Nothing. I just wanted to thank you for shoveling. Oh. He nodded and went back to work. He must have wondered about the crazy lady who yelled at him and then thanked him, but I felt much better. Back home, I pulled out a book I had recently found with the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome in the 2nd century. While he was overseeing military campaigns, fighting off the hordes, and protecting an empire, he also wrote notes to himself about self-awareness and understanding the essence of being human. A central theme was recognizing what is in your control and what isn't, and acting on the one and ignoring the other. It's a philosophy that has resonated over the centuries. Reading through some of the meditations, I found a passage that seemed right for the day. Whether you are shivering with cold or too hot, sleepy or wide awake, do not let it interfere with doing what is right. Very nice. I read it and smiled. Marcus Aurelius was part of a tradition of philosophy whose adherents became known as the Stoics. And though we now use the word to mean long-suffering and resigned, the Stoics simply encouraged people to be rational. Going back to the 3rd century BC, the Stoic philosophers taught that we could handle problems based on how we thought about them. Marcus Aurelius believed we all have an inner power to clear away destructive emotions. He realized you can never be happy if you waste time frustrated by circumstances you can't change. I put the book next to my bed and left it open to one of Marcus's meditations. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. The next morning I woke up, I reread that lovely line even before I checked my iPhone messages. Inspired by Emperor Marcus, I was ready to appreciate the day, and that meant putting my no complaining policy to a further test. Given the weather, I would have liked to stay inside, huddled near a fireplace, but I had a meeting at an ad agency across town. I put on a cashmere dress and leather boots, and taking a tip from a 6-year-old I'd seen playing in the park, I pulled on snow pants underneath. I topped it all off with Gore-Tex gloves and a dorky ear-flap hat. I trudged through the cold and snow and arrived early enough to slip into a ladies' room to remove the ski wear, dry my tote bag with paper towels, and brush out my head hair. When I stepped into his office looking respectable again, the well-dressed executive I was meeting introduced himself and by way of greeting said, "Horrible weather, isn't it? How are you holding up?" I thought of the old proverb that says, instead of complaining that the rose bush has thorns, be happy the rose bush has roses. That is a good one. Do we guys remember? I'm trying to get it. Maybe. Alright. Imitation of books. We're lucky that we work inside. It's very cozy in here, I said cheerfully. He paused for a moment, then smiled. Definitely better than digging ditches. Maybe not a gush of gratitude, but surely more upbeat than discussing the dangers of frostbitten toes, and it probably made us both feel a little warmer, too. For the rest of the week, I took it as a challenge to find a positive twist to every conversation. When people moan about the weather, I sing the praises of heat tech tights, and rubber-insulated boots. Often people forgot their griping and asked where I got them. Uniqlo and LL Bean, by the way. I applauded the storekeepers who shoveled the snow off their sidewalks. I mentioned how lucky we were to have pashmina scarves sold on New York street corners. $5 and they kept you warm. As a last resort, I declared the weather good preparation for the trip to Antarctica I hoped to take. Staying endlessly upbeat, I was surprised at how easily I could change the mood and get people agreeing with me. "You're right," said a man who had started talking about the weather as we waited for our orders at a coffee shop. "In a few months, we'll be complaining about the heat and humidity. Meantime, we get to drink hot chocolate without any guilt," I said, taking my frothy cup from the counter. "Oh, that looks good," he said. "Reason to be grateful," I said, raising my plastic cup in a faux toast. That night, I took out my pretty gratitude journal and wrote a few events from the day that made me feel good. Then I added, still thankful that by complaining less, I'm feeling happier and more appreciative. But then I paused and thought about that. Was giving life a constant positive spin creating reality that wasn't real? The evidence from a variety of fields seems to prove a lot about the power of our perceptions. It's hard to talk about reality when our neurotransmitters respond to subtleties that we may not even recognize. When we believe something, we virtually make it true. For example, a large percentage of people who are given what they think is a well-known brand for a headache, like Advil or Bayer, versus a generic pill report more pain relief from the big brand pill. Doctors and pharmacists go nuts when they hear that because it can't be. Advil is the same as. Sorry, that's my seriously get up, Ashlyn. You have to go to work alarm. Goodness me, I am so sorry. It came out of nowhere. Advil is the same as generic ibuprofen. Bayer is the same as aspirin. The molecular structures are identical and the active ingredients are the same. And don't think for an answer in the inactive ingredients, those shiny sugar coatings, because the experiments have also been done with absolutely identical pills that people are just told are different. Wittingly or not, our own minds create chemicals more powerful than any pain reliever. If you think the big brain will work better, it actually does. I knew the evidence, but it happened to me all the time. While my husband and the doctor had only generic drugs on his side of the medicine cabinet, I had shiny Advil. I knew I was wasting money on packaging and name brand advertising, but when I used his ibuprofen, it just didn't work the same. You can say it's the placebo effect, but you can't dismiss it as not real. Because in all the studies, including my personal one, people's headaches respond differently to what they think they're taking. Similarly, even the most sophisticated oenophiles can be influenced by the price and provenance, real or not, of a wine. An expert opening a bottle that he thinks is a hard-to-get $200 Domaine de Chevalier, I don't know, that's French, I think, will almost always find it tastier than if the label says house wine. Professor Paul Bloom of Yale, who has analyzed the underpinnings of pleasure, reported on one study where experts were given wine bottles with the labels changed. Some of the connoisseurs who got the wine with a cheap label thought it was worth drinking, but 3 times as many approved when it had a fancy label. Did you really just take my annotation? No! You can't have them. God. Sorry, guys. Just being a pest right now. Thought it was worth drinking, but 3 times as many approved when it had a fancy label. Apparently, all the erudite opinions about oaky, earthy, silky, and structured are affected by labels as much as by taste buds. Even more impressive was a study where people agreed to have their brains scanned in fMRI machines while they sipped wine through straws. Anything for research. Screens set up in front of the volunteers purported to give information, including price, about what they were tasting, though actually each sip was the same. Professor Bloom says the pleasure centers of the volunteers' brains lit up like Christmas trees when they believed they were tasting an expensive or rare wine. So it's not just that we think we like something more, we actually experience it in a more positive way. As with the big brand pain reliever, individual neural circuits can create different experiences from the same product. At dinner one evening, when friends cooed over a fancy Napa Valley Chablis that they admired as oaky, lemony, and with floral undertones, I cynically suggested that they were drinking the label rather than the liquid. To me, it tasted like wine. They condescendingly countered that my unsophisticated taste couldn't appreciate terrier subtleties. All of us were probably right. With different expectations, our pleasure centers fire different messages. While we all like to think we are the one having the truly authentic experience, it's possible that there's no such thing. What works for wine and pain relievers can be expanded to a general view of life. Not complaining about the weather was my version of affixing a nice label to a cheap bottle of wine. It didn't change the day, but it did change how I experienced it. That made sense since I'd learned a similar lesson in my marriage that late night when Ron headed off to see a patient in the hospital. Is that where you're hiding my socks? The event wouldn't change, but my reaction could, and if a positive spin could light up my brain's pleasure centers, I didn't mind turning my brain into the neon signs of Times Square. When we appreciate what we have, we are more likely to be satisfied and less likely to be unhappy. On a roll of philosophers, I turned to the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who was born about 340 BC and figured out the value of appreciation a long time ago. He advised, do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things you only hoped for. In the 3rd century, the philosopher Diogenes agreed with the sentiment, and on a wall in Turkey he inscribed a line from Epicurus, "He who is not satisfied with a little is satisfied with nothing." Wise as those comments may be, I also wanted to be a little careful. Philosophy and theology can be all about placating us to be happy, and appreciating what we have doesn't mean we can't strive for more. Gratitude may be the secret sauce for happiness, but the recipe works for a lot of us only if it still allows for ambition and resolve. Given that something as simple as not complaining about the weather made me feel better each day, I wondered what would happen. I wondered what would happen if I didn't complain about anything at all. I could identify 2 kinds of complaining. One where you're just fussing and finding fault, as with the weather, and the other where you actually want something fixed. My no complaining policy would cover just the first category. The second remained simply practical. I didn't have to abandon asking the dry cleaner for fair compensation when he ruined the ruching on my favorite dress. Re-ruching is apparently not possible. And when the heel fell off my brand new boots, I still sent them back for a replacement. Being grateful didn't get in the way of solving problems. But whenever I could, I reminded myself of Epicurus' advice that you shouldn't spoil what you have by wanting something else. Or as the 1970s Stephen Stills song put it, love the one you're with. So instead of getting irritated when I stood in line at the grocery store, I stopped to be grateful I lived in a place where we could buy fresh food, strawberries in winter time. I didn't complain about an editor who didn't get back to me. His inbox was probably packed. When a friend took me to a concert that neither of us liked, I said, genuinely, that it didn't matter. We had fun being together anyway. All the goodwill started to feel natural. What began as a big effort, I'd make myself find reasons to be grateful every day. Started sleeping into my general attitude. It continued at home too. Even though my month of being grateful to Ron had officially ended, the flippant position of seeing the bright side when he rushed off to tend a patient or take a call had made a difference. Thanks and appreciation and positive outlook had started to be the norm. Get down! You are on one today. Get down. Get. Serenity. Down. Thank you. The one downside to the positive was that I suddenly found myself excessively sensitive to people who weren't grateful. My friend Dana met me for drinks one evening, and the moment she sat down, she told me how horrible everything had been. The big corporation where she worked had moved its headquarters downtown, and she hated the new location. Her own office was smaller and had no view, no decent shopping nearby, and the elevator was so slow. A few weeks earlier, I probably would have sympathized and eagerly tossed in my own tidbits to match her misery. But quitting complaining is like giving up greasy french fries. At first it's hard, but after a while you feel so much better that you never want to go back, and you want everyone else to reform too. You like your job, you get paid well, and you're one of the few people who still has an office rather than a cubicle. That's a lot. You should be grateful, I told her. Oh, please, you have no idea how miserable it is. Miserable might be not having a job at all. I have to take the subway home at night, which I hate, but you get a car service in the mornings, which you love. Focus on that part. With too many explanation points exchanged, Dana and I glared at each other, each trying to understand why the other didn't understand. Across the table from me, she looked as perfectly put together as always, her hair freshly blown out, a nice manicure, generous diamond studs in her ears. I told her about my gratitude project and the difference it was making in my life, but Dana wasn't coming around. We parted with a distinct chill between us. When I got home, I told Ron how frustrated I was talking to Dana. She's so ungrateful. She has so much good in her life, and all she can see is what's wrong. Maybe you can help her. I tried, but I don't think I got through. But a week later, Dana called me about some topic that wasn't very important, and only at the end of the conversation did I realize that she had a different agenda. Do you remember last year when I had all that back pain and ended up in surgery? She asked. Of course I do, I said. I was walking down the street yesterday, and I realized I have no pain at all anymore, and I started to feel grateful for every step. Isn't that amazing? Every time I'm walking now, I'm going to think about how grateful I am not to have pain. What are you doing up there? Get down! No! Stop! Stop! Don't be cute right now. You need to stop. I am trying to have a grateful reading here. I am very grateful for you, but you need to stop being a pain in the butt right now and getting into everything. Yes, I love you too. I wish we were in the same room because I wanted to give her a big hug. Grateful for every step. That's a great first step, I said, and she must have felt my grin through the phone. The next day, I took a train down to Philadelphia to talk with Dr. Martin Seligman, the renowned professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, who runs a positive psychology center and is often referred to as the father of the field. If therapists have traditionally focused on fixing unhappy states, Seligman made it okay to think instead about encouraging positive ones. Get down! Stop! Serenity, what are you doing? The door is open. You can walk out. You can stop getting into my stuff. When he was the head of the American Psychological Association, he encouraged a major movement to change the goals of psychology from healing illness to improving well-being. Curing the negatives does not produce the positives, he explained, noting that someone can be free of depression, anxiety, and anger but still not feel satisfied and fulfilled. I first met Dr. Seligman a year earlier when I was starting to think about gratitude, and he invited me to join him for dinner at a fancy restaurant in Philly. Over several courses that included caviar, lobster puffs, a delicately prepared sea bass, and a terrific chocolate mousse, he discussed how gratitude improves well-being. The dinner improved it too. When he created positive psychology, he set happiness as the gold standard for what was trying to be achieved. But now that he had seen more results, he was convinced that happiness wasn't enough, and to truly flourish, we needed advantages like engagement, meaning, purpose, and gratitude. Life satisfaction isn't just about a cheerful mood. We now are looking for at a greater sense of well-being, he said, tasting the amuse-bouche that the very gracious waiter brought. For our meeting this time, I grabbed a sandwich at a local deli and then went to Dr. Seligman's office. An entire academic discipline had grown around his ideas about positive psychology, and his team investigated affirmative approaches was large enough to take up a whole floor. Yeah, I'm not going to make it through all this. It's already 1:13. We sat down and I told him about my effort to live gratefully for the year. He nodded approvingly. Of all the positive strengths we've looked at, people who are highest in gratitude are also highest in well-being. The correlation was strong, but Seligman also raised the issue of causation versus causality. It was the old chicken and egg question. Does gratitude improve your well-being, or do people with a high level of well-being also feel more grateful? The answer seemed to be both. Grateful people typically have more friends and social interactions and a rosier view of life that helps them flourish. But if you don't come by that naturally, what Seligman called gratitude interventions can have a big effect. You get relatively ungrateful people like me and have them do gratitude journals and letters and visits and see if their well-being increases, he explained. Several studies have shown that the interventions have an effect that lingers for days, weeks, or even months. I mentioned that my gratitude journal was already changing my attitude and helping me refocus on the positive. Very good. And here's another variant. As you go through the day, take photos of the things that you might write about in your journal that night. Doing something has a stronger effect than just thinking about it. From what I'd already learned about bodies and brains, I could see how an action would help send the right message to and through the neurons. An action helps cement the neurological pathways we're trying to encourage. In his earlier research, Seligman had found that the intervention that caused the most noticeable improvement was the gratitude visit. In his plan, you start by thinking of someone who changed your life for the better and sit down and write a letter of thanks. Make sure it's concrete and specific, about 300 words, and describes what the person did and how you were affected. Then arrange to get together with the person, not saying why. When you arrive, slowly and meaningfully read the letter. No interruptions allowed. Interacting is a big phenomenon. There will be a lot of crying and emotion and hugs, but that aside, what we found is that the person who has written the letter will be less depressed and feel more positive about life in general for a full month afterwards. A full month seemed like a big effect from a small project. On the other hand, I was working on a year of gratitude. I needed the lift to linger even longer. You could run your own experiment, Seligman said with a smile. I've never thought of doing more than one gratitude visit, but see what happens if you do 3 over the year, or 12. On the train home, I thought about a gratitude letter I'd written years earlier that still made me feel good. At the time, I was editor-in-chief of the largest circulation magazine in America, reaching some 72 million people every week. I'd done a cover story on President George Bush when he was in office, and when Barack Obama was elected president, I thought it would be a great coup to have him write a cover story for the weekend before his inauguration. I spoke to his communications guy, who pointed out, reasonably enough, that the president was saving all the good stuff for his inaugural address. What did I have in mind that would be worth writing and wouldn't conflict? I had about 30 seconds to come up with a persuasive idea. Maybe the article could be a letter to his daughters about what he hopes for them in the next 4 years, I suggested. Not bad. Let me check, he said. Within an hour, I had the reply. Obama liked the idea and would start writing, but as the deadline for closing the issue approached, I still hadn't received it, so I called again. I'm anxious to see the president's story, I said. So are we. He's actually writing this one himself, said the communications chief. The article arrived that afternoon, so beautifully written that I didn't change a word. Trust me, that's unusual, even in a piece from the president. When the issue came out, the president's letter got a rapturous reception and international attention. A couple of years later, the president turned the letter to his daughters into a children's book. All the excitement around the article and the praise I got for publishing it made me reflect that good ideas, even original ones, came from somewhere. The seed for mine occurred years earlier when a rabbi we knew talked about writing an ethical will. Typical wills dealt with money and property, he said, but shouldn't we also leave our children a record of our values and hopes, our dreams for their future? He read aloud the letter he had written to his then toddler daughter, talking about morals and values and the kind of person he hoped she'd marry. Moved by both his sense and his sensibility, I went home and wrote my own ethical wills to Zach and Matt. They then just 4 and 2. Tears streaked down my cheeks as I tried to imagine not being with them as I grew, so I used this letter to tell them what I thought mattered, what I hoped they would find in life. I sealed the envelopes and put them in a safe. That powerful experience had been in the back of my mind when I suggested the president write a letter to his daughters. And when the article came out, I sat down and wrote another letter, this one to Rabbi Jeffrey Segelman. I told him how his words had resounded through the years, stayed in my heart, and sparked an article that millions of people had now read. I am so grateful for the inspiration you gave me these many years ago and proud to share it, I wrote. Recognizing how someone has contributed to your life makes you feel deeply just how interconnected we all are. The rabbi sent me a gracious thanks, but I was probably more moved by writing the letter than he was by receiving it. Marty Seligman was right. A very sincere expression of gratitude makes you happy. His studies found the glow could linger and even fight depression for several weeks, and here I was, several years later, still feeling good about a gratitude letter. Following in Seligman's positive psychology footsteps, a number of academics have started to do gratitude research, some of them setting up rubrics and definitions for what makes us feel grateful to another person. I'm not sure I agree with all of them. For example, one popular line of reasoning holds that we feel more gratitude when something is costly, whether in time, of effort, or money. So we thank the friend who drops us at the airport when he's going anyway, but we're much more grateful to the neighbor who goes out of her way to drive us. We also appreciate actions done voluntarily and altruistically. That is, the person didn't have to do it. One research survey I saw raised the question of how grateful you'd be to a person who jumped into a lake to rescue you if you were drowning. Very grateful, probably, but how about if he were a lifeguard? Would you be equally grateful to someone just doing his job? Yeah. Personally, once I've stopped coughing up water, I'm not going to be making a lot of distinctions about who dragged me to shore. Sitting on that train, I thought that the best kind of gratitude is the one you feel in your heart, not your mind. The rabbi I wrote to had given his advice as part of his job, but I was grateful for the wisdom and power of his words. All the techniques that Marty Seligman recommended, journals and photos and letters and visits, were just ways of helping us get into the moment and see the beauty of the world and the people in it. Amtrak isn't known for inspiring epiphanies, but looking out the window, I felt a deep sense of bliss. Now! You do not get on my fucking shit! I was on there. So awesome. Alright, y'all, so that's all I have for you. When we get back to this, probably tonight, I don't know. It just really depends when I feel like reading again about gratitude. I'm trying to be grateful, and it's not working very well. But the next part is going to be part 2, which is spring, and deals with money, career, and the stuff we own. So, I will see you guys in the next video. Make sure you leave a like, and if you are practicing your own gratitude journal, I would like to know down in the comments below.